Hello, everybody. I'm Jen Gray. Welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Forward. Scott Hayden, our intrepid producer, thank you for getting this all going again. And I'm very excited to welcome our guest this evening, George Tzougros, who's Executive Director of the Wisconsin Arts Board, critically important advocate and ally for all of us working in the arts, and therefore for all who engage with the arts as patrons in this state. So welcome, George. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Scott.
For anybody who is listening live on YouTube or on Facebook, please, as always, feel free to throw questions into the chat or comment section. Scott's able to make sure that George and I can see those so that we can answer questions to the best of our ability as they come up. But George, can you just start by telling us a little bit about what your agency does here?
That'd be great. Thank you, Jen. So the Wisconsin Arts Board is the state arts agency. Every state has one. And the good news is we can break it down to 4 C's. It's about creativity, it's about culture, it's about community, and it's about commerce. And so the Wisconsin Arts Board has been around since 1973. We are best known for our grant making. So we fund arts organizations throughout the state. And we also provide technical assistance to arts organizations, to artists, to communities that want to get involved in the arts in some way. And so we have a staff of 4, including myself, real experts who really know the state well and are more than happy when they can travel to travel the state and mix it up with people across the state. And when they can't, they can do that via email or via phone, however else. So it's money, it's information, it's assistance, it's all of those great things. And it's all brought to you by the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. And talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges that the last 6 months have brought. I mean, obviously, they've brought all of us many, many challenges, and but sort of the focus of this conversation series that we've been doing since March has been to shine a spotlight on how different groups and organizations are adapting and pivoting and responding to what COVID has wrought.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our case, March 16th is the day that lives in infamy for us. That's the day we all started working from home. And so our staff works from home. We meet with each other every other day. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the morning via Microsoft Teams. And the pivot for us was quickly to what is it the field needs, right? What can we do to support the field given the resources we have available to us? And the first thing we did out of the blocks with our partners at Arts Wisconsin was to climb on the internet and have just resource calls that in the beginning started out with, how you doing out there? Because basically everybody needed to talk about what was happening. And then they became more specific as to the kinds of resources people needed to know about, whether that was the SBA money that was available to them or, other kinds of resources that the field should know about that might not otherwise know. And then we started getting involved in conversations that were specific to a particular aspect of the industry. So the choirs got together and talked, and the children's theaters got together and talked, and those kind of things, so that in a job-alike way, people could start talking about, okay, how's it happening for you, and what could we learn from each other? So those were important in the beginning. We also developed a COVID-19 section of our website, as did everyone else. But to bring it under one roof, to point people to the direction of not only what Wisconsin was saying, but others were saying in the arts. So that was important as well. And then we just kept that flowing through our daily Wisconsin arts news, through our Facebook and Twitter pages, and just kept that moving. And then staff started looking in on webinars. So the upside, I guess, of where we are is that we have the opportunity to learn from everywhere. And so to really get included in those conversations of how are things happening financially? How are things happening with organizations, and what are they doing with their staffs? What are they doing there? And then, of course, most importantly, how is everybody holding up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we can think about this as organizational, but it really comes down to individuals and how they can deal with what's become the multiple pandemics, right? So we've got the pandemic of COVID-19, the social and racial injustice. We've also got an economy that's different than it might have otherwise been. So lots of different things going on out there, and learning about that, and then being able to, as an information conduit, get that out to the field.
Yeah. And I know that you working in partnership with Arts Wisconsin, which is the advocacy organization statewide for the arts. Such a huge part of this last 6 months has wound up being in advocacy, making sure that as federal relief and state relief economic programs are put together, that the really the devastation being wrought across this entire sector is not being overlooked. And, you and I have talked many times over the last decade about the degree to which the arts are really ignored as the economic driver that they actually are.
Right.
In our local communities, statewide, nationwide, it's an enormous job sector and economic growth sector. And to a degree that is not matched by many other industries, we've just been put on hold by COVID, and sort of reminding our representation of that it's always a challenge and has been increasingly so over this time period. So what can you tell us about what's happening, here in Wisconsin? And maybe that might include some calls to action for anybody listening.
Sure. So first of all, the National Endowment for the Arts was lucky enough to get money from the CARES Act from the beginning. And so it was $75 million. As the chairman would say, it wasn't as much as they would have liked, but it was something to get out into the field. And so they passed that along to the state arts agencies, and the state arts agencies then to the constituency. So first and foremost, that money got out relatively quickly. We need to put two parentheses around that, however. One of them is to nonprofit organizations. So let's underscore from the outset that the individual artists, those who are gig economy workers playing in bars, or individual visual artists whose galleries are facing the same kinds of challenges as the rest of us, those kinds of individual artists did not see what the nonprofits saw through the NEA. And so we always want to make sure that we put that there. The other thing we need to say from the outset too is the arts are important for a lot of things beyond the economy. And I think nothing has been any more evident than this time of being safer at home, right? So people are picking up books that they've wanted to read. They're picking up instruments they used to play but wanted to get reintroduced to, et cetera. So all of those things are important as well. So the arts are important for their own sake. They're important for the economy, and the artists are the building block of all of that. So the SBA came up with money as well, and it was the first time the nonprofit arts sector was included in those conversations. So that was a victory of sorts, right? So all of a sudden now, as you said, people didn't really identify the arts in economic development, and yet this time they were included. And bless all of the nonprofit arts organizations who went there and got it and were successful in that. So good for them. Every state has gotten money through their governor's office that's additional to what we talked about earlier about getting from the NEA. So the governors have dispensation and discretion as to how they'll give those dollars out. And if you're watching the news, you've seen the ways Governor Evers has so far given those dollars. There are still dollars available. And of course, there's still a reason for the arts to be supported. The money we talked about, even SBA money, even CARES Act original money, it's gone or is going to be gone really very quickly. And so additional money is necessary. And Scott was just rolling through the Brookings Institution article, but I wanted to pick out a quote from that article, and it's written by Richard Florida, But I think this is really important. He says in a bullet point in this article, small stopgap measures will not undo the damage of COVID-19. A substantial and sustained national creative economy recovery strategy is required. This strategy must be bottom up, but supported across the board and led by local public-private partnerships between municipal governments, arts and cultural institutions, economic development and community groups, philanthropy, and the private sector, with support from federal and state levels of government, national philanthropy, and large corporations. So he's making this very strong case that this is extraordinarily necessary for not only those organizations to continue to exist, but for our communities writ large to be healthy and maintain the level of quality of life that they need.
Yeah, and it's not a brand new idea. The idea of a national program during a time of crisis, especially a time of economic crisis, to engage the arts as a major driver in building the country back. I mean, we saw this during the Great Depression with the Works Progress Administration, which had all kinds of offshoots, including the Federal Theater Project, near and dear to my own heart. But that in the past, it has been seen that involving the arts can help bring the nation out of an economic crisis. And I know we started Forward during the last recession, the 2008, 2009 recession. And from the federal government on down, at that point, there were a lot of calls for the arts to help build the economy back up, to help inspire communities and citizens as we did that hard work together. So there's templates out there if we want to use them, and lots of ways to adapt that to more, have it not all be top down from the federal government, but to work more locally. So let's be inspired. It's
let's be creative. Shall we be creative? This would be a good thing.
Yes, we can do that. That's what we do.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about, and I'm going to make clear for everybody listening, it's not your fault that Wisconsin's funding per capita for the arts lives where it does. Would you like to share those super inspiring statistics?
Well, yes, and one of the documents that Scott has been scrolling through as well is the arts and culture in a pandemic, an existential crisis. And in it, the Wisconsin Policy Forum notes what I'm about to say. The numbers come from the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. And sadly, in fiscal year 20, Wisconsin is number 50. That's right, number 50 out of the 50 states in its per capita funding of the state arts agency. So this doesn't take into consideration private giving. It doesn't take into consideration what the government gives to university systems or whatever the case may be. It's specifically state arts agencies. And so we are 50th in the nation in that category. Now, why is that challenging? If you look over the border to our west, Minnesota is number one, and God bless them for being number one. But the disparity is Minnesota per capita funds its state arts agency at $7 plus, and Wisconsin at 14 cents per capita.
I hope everybody listening feels the ice water running down their back hearing those numbers, because I sure do.
Well, and people often just react because that's not who we think we are, right?
Yeah.
As a people in the state of Wisconsin, we don't think that we're that backward in our support of the arts. And honestly, on an individual basis, they're not. They're out there walking with their feet, being in galleries, being in theaters, etc. But when it comes to the support that comes through the state arts agency, not. Now, we should say that in Minnesota, they tax themselves to number one. They have what they call the Legacy Amendment, which is about clean water, conservation, and the arts and culture. And so they passed that through their legislature, signed it by the governor, and now when they started, I think they had about an $8 million budget for the arts in Minnesota. They now have a $43 million budget for the arts in the state of Minnesota, up against a $1.6 million budget in Wisconsin. And one has to argue that we have equally wonderful arts organizations doing extraordinary work. And you could take it as disrespectful that the dollars aren't there, but I would also take it as a call to action, as you said before, working through our friends at Arts Wisconsin to get out there and say, I'm sorry, this isn't insufficient at best and embarrassing at worst.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the dollars don't stay with the Arts Board. As we've said over the years, we could give the grants out and add multiple zeros to the ends of the checks, and it's not going to cost any more administrative time to do that.
Right. There are a few things that will get me as high up on a soapbox as this particular topic, but it's frustrating on many levels. As you say, it can feel disrespectful when you work in this industry, and especially, I'm sure you hear all the time, I've certainly heard public conversations that think of support of the arts as being charitable somehow. It's a luxury that we will, if we've got anything extra, we will send it that way. And what it really ignores is that those dollars, even that really paltry 14 cents per capita that gets invested in the arts by the state of Wisconsin, is returned manifold back to the state. I get very, people who know me know that I'm not a very cranky person, but I get very cranky when people talk about the arts, about the state supporting the arts, because that is not the case. The arts are supporting the state of Wisconsin. The economics generated, leaving aside all of the reasons we love the arts and need the arts to make our lives and our communities robust and worthwhile and fulfilled. But take all that aside and get right down just to the cold, hard dollars. When you invest in an arts organization, you make money as a community, as a state, as a country. And boy, it would be really nice to see our state legislature understand that and start to make some change. I'm not asking to be number one overnight. It'd be nice to not be 50.
Absolutely. And to your point, we used to do in our PowerPoints, we used to have a slide of Oliver Twist with the bowl and then the international symbol like this through him, because you think of it, oh, the arts are pleased, sir, may I have some more? But to your point, it's not a black hole. You're not throwing money into a black hole. You're generating dollars from having invested in the arts. And it's much more challenging than even that, because Max Garland, who was once our state's poet laureate, teaches at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And when he's talking about this dynamic of Wisconsin versus Minnesota and their support of the arts, he says, how do I tell my students to stay here?
Yeah.
I'm an hour and a half from the Twin Cities. How am I going to tell them to stay here when it's clear one state values what they care about and the other doesn't? And so it's not only a quality of life issue and an economic development, it's a jobs issue and a workforce issue. If you want to retain the talented workforce you want for the state of Wisconsin, you probably want to provide for them what they value. So.
Yeah. Do you have any insight that you can share with the listeners to, and I see Samara's asking who we should call. I'll get to that in 1 second. But any insight on where things stand? I know there's a lot of talk about what's the next CARES Act or HEROES Act or whatever the next big federal package that is hopefully going to be the next step in addressing some of the economic harm that has been done by COVID. Where do things stand with additional funding for the arts? There's been a lot of different bills. There's, Congress is on recess, but what can you share about where things are at the moment?
Right now, the biggest thing for the CARES Act is what dollars will come through to the states to cushion the blow of COVID's havoc that it's wrought on the state budgets.
Right.
Because what will happen is if that doesn't happen, then the governor and the legislature are going to have to look at the state budget and make some significant choices, right? And so that's going to be a moment in time where arts advocates are going to have to rise up and say what they value and why they are of value.
Yeah.
And that one's not even moving forward because of the challenges of who wants to fund unemployment and who doesn't, who wants to have a payroll tax abatement and who doesn't, and so on and so on. So It's not going anywhere fast. One hopes that there will be something along the way that they will negotiate and move forward. Where the arts will be in that, it's a really open question, because in addition to globally talking about the arts, the independent venue producers are going and trying to get support because their venues are under stress. The museum world is going through the Alliance of Museums, and they're asking for their piece of the pie. And by the way, that's okay, because that's the way the democratic government works, right? So people are asking whether that will manifest in something. It's unclear at this point. And I know our friends at Americans for the Arts are doing the same.
Yeah, and I wonder if everybody even realizes the degree to which that is happening. It's happening at the federal level. It's happening at the state level. It's happening at the local level. I think about Overture Center for the Arts, Forward's, physical home, and they get every year some level of funding from the city of Madison. That funding comes out of the room tax fund. There's virtually nobody staying in hotels, so the money that the room tax fund usually has to give out has gone from this to this, and then the mayor has to look at, okay, now there's only this much, where does that go? And it's happening at every level, at the state funding, the county funding, all of it. And cumulatively, when you combine the decimation of government support with the total absence of ticket revenue, of any sort of earned revenue from patrons, and then you add the economic hardships that many of our philanthropic donors are experiencing because of the economic crisis, right, there's nowhere to turn. There's nowhere to turn, and that's why it really is truly such a crisis on every level for this field.
Absolutely. And yet the creativity of the field has moved online in ways that they probably hadn't anticipated they would in advance of all this. The challenge, of course, with that is, how do you monetize it? How is there any money coming back that direction because you've done that? And one of the things I've been saying to people now is, think about what's going to happen in December, when Tiny Tim's not going to wish us, God bless us all, everyone, and the Nutcrackers are not going to dance, and nobody's singing Hallelujah chorus. Obviously, there will be television and movies, whatever. Those kinds of things are happening. But the social capital of being together in one hall, experiencing it all together during that moment in the year, it's going to be really a challenge, I think, to our communities at a time when people are feeling worn down already with what they're dealing with.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, can you put that wonderful question back up? Because we were in the middle. Yes, I thought that was from Joan Luann. So how do sources of support in Minnesota, other ones, compare to the patronage of the Wisconsin arts programs? Do you know, George?
We don't know if we can't quantify that, but we will say anecdotally, people will say the corporations in Minnesota, especially those in the Twin Cities, are certainly great benefactors to the field. And in different communities here in the state of Wisconsin, we have the same. Dollar for dollar, I can't say. But I think what you said was really important to all of it. Whatever it was is not what it's going to be. Meaning the corporations are under great stress. So do they have the money? The local businesses, think of the businesses on State Street who might have been contributing to people's programs, et cetera. What do they have available to them to do that anymore? So there's a lot of stress throughout the system, and to say that it's a perfect storm is an overused metaphor, but certainly that's what's going on. All of the buckets that we've become used to going to are in challenge.
Yeah.
Now, going back just for a second to the other part of that story, which we said that the arts are not a charity. Actually, in the state of Wisconsin, the arts and culture are a $10 billion business. Right? 10 billion with a B. And that's just not a lot of nice arts people hanging around saying that. It's the Bureau of Economic Analysis at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So those folks are saying what we've been saying for the years, but they've got the numbers to back it up. And that's in Wisconsin. right? That's just Wisconsin's number. And so if people are looking to point to something, they can say, you didn't think this is a healthy business in Wisconsin? It is. And going back to Florida's quote, we better get about doing something to support that.
Yeah. Well, going back then to Samara's question, asking who can we call? What are the advocacy actions that people listening could take? What are the ears we should be speaking into to make sure priorities remember the arts?
All right, so this is a good opportunity for me to remind everybody that the Arts Board educates and Arts Wisconsin advocates. Right?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
So first of all, call Arts Wisconsin, who will be advocating on your behalf, and ask them what you can do to help. However, if you're looking to educate policymakers for the CARES Act money that's available right now, you need to educate the governor and the Department of Administration and those folks. I will tell you, just as a side note, the Secretary of Tourism, whose industry, as you've already noted, is in a great challenge itself, is a grand supporter of the arts and understands the value of the arts and culture for their own sake, but their economic value as well. So CARES Act money, go talk to the governor. We're also at the beginning of the next biennial budget conversation. So state agencies by September 15th will have submitted their budgets to the governor. And between September and January, maybe February, but January, when he makes his speech about the state budget, that's the time to be talking not only with the governor's office about that, but also with the people in the Joint Committee on Finance. Because the most important committee in the legislature is the Joint Committee on Finance. These are the folks who take the governor's budget, whatever he proposes, and they say the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. So they get about disposing what it is he's given to them. And so there are definitely allies and advocates for the arts on the Joint Committee on Finance. And again, talking with Arts Wisconsin, you probably will learn who those folks are and how best to communicate with them. But we talk about education and gratitude, right? So people who receive grants from us do two things. They write a thank you letter to the governor and to the legislature, not only to educate them on what it is they're doing and what state money is supporting, but saying thank you, which we tend to forget is so crucial. And it doesn't take many of those thank you notes to be noticed, because you'll hear from state legislators that they're asked all the time to do stuff, but the number of thank you notes they get, they can count on one hand. Yeah. So when they get them from the arts, they notice, they pay attention.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, George. And yes, and for the helpful reminder that we can also go to Arts Wisconsin for advocacy guidance, and that's artswisconsin.org, I believe, with Wisconsin spelled out.
Yeah.
Well, we're sort of coming to the end of our time here. Is there anything, any parting words of encouragement or anything, or again, calls to action you'd like to share with us?
So the one thing that I got, Scott, was a link to Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk, Do Schools Kill Creativity? Sir Ken passed away last week. And if you haven't seen it, it's the #1 TED Talk of all time. It's extraordinarily funny, but it's extraordinarily important because it's about imagination, creativity, and innovation. And so if there's a call to action in that space, it's, first of all, watch the video. Second of all, make sure that as your kids and your community are going to virtual, hybrid, or in-person learning, figure out where the arts are in those conversations. Because we are learning more and more about how to teach the disciplines online. But we want to make sure that they're clearly a part of our kids' lives, because if we want to deal with all of the challenges that face us in the future, our kids have to be able to think creatively, whether that means they become artists or anything else. They need to be able to look at something, see patterns, make decisions, etc. And the arts are so critical to that. So at this moment when Sir Ken has passed away, it's a really good opportunity to say again, imagination, creativity, and innovation. And if, Jen, you're looking for the hope that gets us to the other side, I think it's those three words that get us there. So
that was beautifully done. You gave me just what I needed.
good.
Thank you.
All right.
George, thank you not only for being here this evening, but just for all of the work. All of us have had to make such sacrifices and adaptations to working through this last 6 months. And for someone doing the work that you're doing, I know it's not easy, and all of us in the field are so grateful.
And it's because of groups like yours that we keep it going, because it reminds us that we're not just pushing paper around an office, but there's impact going on throughout the state. And we want to make sure we can keep that going.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that funding. And for everybody who's listening, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week.
Very good.
Hello, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.